brief moment for liberty or new energy? For 3 weeks in the spring of 2020, Libertarians had high hopes and a new energy while Congressman Justin Amash was officially exploring a bid for the presidency of the United States. Unfortunately, Amash, now the only Libertarian Party member in the U.S. Congress, ended his bid, bursting the bubble of excitement his brief stint created. Stick with us. This is the Rob Manus Show. Americans are ready for practical approaches based in humility and trust of the people. We're ready for a presidency that will restore respect for our Constitution and bring people together. I'm excited and honored to be taking these first steps towards serving Americans of every background as president. That's how Congressman Justin Amash began his exploratory bid for the 2020 presidential race. While the prospective presence of a strong Libertarian candidate quickly energized those voters who will likely vote for a Libertarian Party candidate anyway, even some so-called never-Trumpers weren't exactly on board with the idea, meaning that he was not likely to draw many disaffected Republicans away from the Biden campaign, and it's a very heavy lift to expect a pro-life Libertarian could draw very much support from a majority socialist Democrat Party. So 3 weeks later, here's how Amash ended his exploration. This environment presents extraordinary challenges. Polarization is near an all-time high. Electoral success requires an audience willing to consider alternatives, but both social media and traditional media are dominated by voices strongly averse to the political risk posed by a viable third candidate. The new reality of social distancing also levels the playing field among the candidates in many respects, but it also means lesser-known candidates are more dependent on adequate media opportunities to reach people. Today, most Americans are understandably more interested in what life will look like tomorrow than they are in broader policy debates, and news coverage has reflected those priorities. At the same time, fundraising challenges posed by an idled economy will hinder advertising. It's a tough political landscape, folks, especially for a third-party candidate in the 2020 election year. So this doesn't surprise me, but it does mean there might not be enough Americans left to elect a small government, conservative, liberty candidate nationally. And what does that say about the state of the republic? Does it even still exist? Joining me today is Austin Peterson, a man who has run a presidential race as a Libertarian Party candidate, is an icon in the liberty movement today, and knows its ideas better than anyone. One of my favorites, my friend, I call him, it's Mr. Austin Peterson from the great state of Missouri and former Libertarian Party presidential candidate. Austin, welcome back to the Rob Manus Show.
It's absolutely a delight. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you and your family are well in this pandemic time that we're having here. And we sure are praying for the country to get back to business, and we're starting to see some life come back into some businesses, but it's not fast enough, and it's not soon enough, and we need to go faster, in my opinion. Well, you know, for a very brief moment over the last 4 weeks, Austin, there was a lot of excitement in liberty circles from a politics perspective amongst even a lot of Republicans that are called liberty-minded Republicans, some Democrats that are liberty-minded, about the potential presidential candidacy of Justin Amash. Congressman Amash is now the only Libertarian Party member of the United States Congress. I kind of like saying that, even though I'm not a member of that party, just because. But really, you know, Mr. Amash's decision generates some questions to me, and that is usually, you know this and I know this, but folks that haven't run for office don't realize this. Most often you set up a exploratory committee. It's a legal entity. It gives you authorities and and the ability to do some things. And usually, I would say most of the time, it leads to a full-up political committee for a candidate to run for an office. So it's not that usual for a candidate to get to the end of that exploratory time and really have to come out and say, look, the conditions just aren't conducive for a viable run. And I'm of the mind you never want to run just as a token or to make a statement or those kind of things. So while I was a little bit surprised and even a little bit disappointed, even though Mr. Amash hadn't won me over yet, I was kind of looking forward to see how he was going to do it. But what the big question is for me, and that one of the reasons I want to get you on, my friend, is that what does this mean about? Does it mean anything about America? Is the liberty movement still going to be able to move forward, or was this just a brief moment that energized everybody? And is it going to just, wind down, or is it going to be new energy for the liberty movement across the nation? Does it mean any of those things?
Perhaps. I think that probably some of the reasons for why Justin Amash decided not to run might be a little bit more mundane than the more fun ideas that we're trying to sort of speculate for. If you think about it, this is a pandemic year, and of course libertarians face unbelievable challenges trying to explain their principles to people in a year where they're not absolutely quaking in their boots and terrified and calling for authoritarian big government to step on everybody's necks. But also the fact that we have 36 million people unemployed in this country. It was difficult enough for me to try and raise a significant amount of money from my presidential and Senate campaigns in years when the economy was doing quite well. But imagine trying to run as an outsider and trying to make a name for yourself in 2020 when 36 million people are unemployed and you have to fundraise in that environment. It's already very difficult to fundraise when you have the establishments of both parties that will do strangleholds on anyone who tries to raise money outside of the system. That was a major institutional challenge that I faced, is that when I tried to raise money during my Senate campaign, the president and the vice president and the big funders here in Missouri would blackball anybody who'd donated to my campaign. Imagine how much pressure there'll be during an election year for President of the United States against Trump and Joe Biden, two of the most entrenched established interests in the entire world. So Justin Amash might have looked at those circumstances and said to himself that he really just didn't have the capability to run a viable presidential campaign. Now, the Libertarian Party makes it easier for candidates like that to run for president. And so I guess perhaps I thought that his running for the Libertarian Party president was why he had switched his parties. But still, there's also the maybe a little bit more interesting and fun to talk about problems, such as the fact that it being a digital convention, the Libertarian Party going to a fully digital convention won't allow Justin Amash to be able to do the sort of handshaking and baby kissing that's necessary to win the nomination of the Libertarian Party. They're quite cantankerous. And then on that note about them being cantankerous, it's quite possible that he might have met with some of the people from the Libertarian Party, the delegates, and said, they're crazy. I'm out of here. So there's lots of reasons why. And I actually don't necessarily blame the Libertarian Party in that respect, just because, again, it is a closed political party like others, and they have their ways of doing things. And Justin Amash may have just simply said, I don't feel welcome, especially because there was a backlash against him when he jumped in the race, like there is anyone. But it was then centered around the issue of abortion, which is one of the reasons why I felt out of place in the party, because despite the fact that the party platform doesn't say anything specifically about their position on abortion, it's quite clear that people who are pro-life are not welcome.
And that's unfortunate because I don't bash the Libertarian Party, but when people have asked me about running as a candidate in the party, my response is usually, well, like the vision of it, I get conjured up as a guy on the stage from a convention not too many years ago. I'm not even going to describe it, but it just indicates
we all know
people are concerned. Yeah, people are concerned about that, and that's one of the other questions I was going to ask you if you'd heard anything. Whether Congressman Amash will stay as a Libertarian Party person to try to energize the growth of that party, maybe, and maybe bring it forward a little bit, not to get it away from its libertarian ways, but to get it into ways where a person like you or me or him who are staunchly pro-life would feel accepted, because I mean the ultimate liberty in my mind is the liberty of life. I mean I think that's why it's listed first in the Declaration of Independence, if I remember correctly.
Well, sure. And also with liberty comes responsibility. And too often libertarians like to accept what they believe is the philosophy without accepting the personal responsibility that comes alongside it. But when it comes to Justin Amash, he has said that he would stay in the Libertarian Party and continue to build the Libertarian Party. However, it remains to be seen of whether or not he can win his congressional race again. He has maintain, and this was actually kind of a stickling point and a rumor that was flying, was that he had never closed his congressional campaign committee. So it's possible that he will continue to seek re-election this year and try and win re-election as a member of the Libertarian Party in his home state of Michigan. But that remains to be seen. The challenge is for any presidential candidate this year, even with Donald Trump, considering the fact that Donald Trump has lost his biggest talking point, which is the strength of the American economy, it's going to be difficult for him to run this year. Joe Biden is not able to have campaign rallies. That might actually help Joe Biden this year because he doesn't appear in public sounding crazy. So it's really going to be a big question of what's going to happen this fall. I think is actually going to be way more up in the air than a lot of people would like. And what I'm really concerned about is not just the president, but the fact that it's looking very likely the Democrats could hold on to the House of Representatives. And if the Senate goes as well, we better hope that the oppositional party remains in the White House, because otherwise, not barring any unforeseen circumstances where a miracle happens with a Libertarian Party presidential candidate, which I don't predict, you certainly would not want to have a coalition of Democratic White House and a Democratic House and Senate, because that would really spell disaster bigger than a pandemic, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree with that opinion. I think the pandemic is an issue enough, but it's that 36 million people unemployed that really has my attention. Suicides increase during the Great Depression. They increased dramatically. They're going to increase dramatically in this situation because of the unemployment. We all know what the numbers tell us on that, and it's likely you could have more casualties. Americans dying from the impacts of the economy than it happens from the virus itself. So we've got to get moving on that, in my opinion. On the issue of a viable third party in the country, and Mr. Amash staying with the party to work on building it and those kind of things with the Libertarian Party, what do you see as the future of that effort, the possibilities of it, I guess, I'm interested in your opinion on that.
So, in studying the history of third-party movements in the United States, it's about every 30 years or so that a third party starts to arise, or that the American people are very interested in a third party. And I'm not just saying this because I ran in 2016, but I do believe that 2016 was probably about that surge, that moment where people really were interested in seeing a third party. But looking back at history, when you have a country in the middle of a war, or even a Great Depression, how many terms did FDR serve? 4 terms? He was in his 4th term, but when he died in office. Yeah. So yeah. The more afraid people are, the less viable I think a third party is. In 2016, it was that I felt that people were more afraid of Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton more than they were something like a disease or something like a war. But because the American people right now are under a threat of a pandemic and of the loss of their economic, their life savings and their jobs, I don't see something like that happening for quite some time now. Maybe not for another 20 to 25 years.
Wow, that's interesting and troubling, really, because I don't believe that the two-party system is serving the American people well from the perspective of what the founders would be seeing today, and we see it every day with the pandemic response in the different states and at the federal level with those kinds of things. So we'll keep an eye on the Libertarian Party movement. And what do you think the impact, or not the impact, but the repercussions will be at any idea at the state, federal, legislative levels on what the repercussions will be to try to change emergency powers declarations. And I know I'll lead in that if I get the opportunity. Just wondering, hopefully Justin Amash will lead in that. Mr. Thomas Massey from Kentucky will, I know, and Rand Paul more than likely. What are your thoughts on the possibility of getting some good policy change and to prevent some of these things that are happening with civil liberties and those kinds of things?
It's interesting that you asked that question because it was just brought to my awareness at the end of last week that the Department of Health and Human Services here in the state of Missouri quietly sought for a rule change to make the county level health departments in the state of Missouri to give their powers permanence, meaning the ability to shut down businesses such as they were here in the state of Missouri, that ability was going to be given to them permanently. Some of the powers that the local governments here in the United States took were far more authoritarian than our federal government gave. Yeah, earlier in your introduction, you were talking about the question of whether the United States is a republic. If anything, there was one key indicator during this entire crisis that America still is a republic in many ways, for better or for worse in some ways, simply because when Donald Trump stated very openly that he was the one to make the final decision about who opens and who closes. Now, many of his Democratic oppositionalist governors pushed back against that, but there were quite a few Republican governors who pushed back against that as well. And then the president of the United States simply realized he didn't have that authority. And it wasn't just a constitutional question of whether he had it. He simply didn't have any levers of power or buttons he could push, or bureaucrats or police officers that he could send out across a country of 333 very cantankerous people and force them to reopen. Plus, when people are afraid, if they don't want to reopen their business, if they don't want to go to a mall, they don't go. Some people, aren't going to certain restaurants, I'm hearing, around the country. But when it comes to the emergency powers on the federal level, I would say that probably that more has been done to undo the faith in institutions like the CDC and the FDA than has in recent memory, or maybe in their entire history. It's sort of like the same kind of impact that Waco and Ruby Ridge and those incidents had for people's faith and confidence in the ATF, or Fast and Furious under Eric Holder and their confidence in the ATF and others. So with the CDC and the WHO dropping the ball so enormously, I think it might actually be an opportunity for there to be some reform, specifically at the FDA, who you could lay at the foot the problem with the lack of widespread testing in the United States, because they inhibited it directly in the early days when it really mattered. I would probably argue that libertarians and conservatives, limited government conservatives, if there are any left, no offense, that the best position to take would be to go after the FDA. Because if anybody has really screwed the pooch on this situation, it's been the people who stood in the way of private companies being able to do the testing that they now say is necessary, and that they're demanding on the rest of us, saying, well, in the Washington Post yesterday, they said, Americans may never have widespread testing because they believe too much in freedom. And they put freedom in quotes. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have widespread testing because our government has failed us, and that's never been more apparent. We shouldn't let the liberals and the big government authoritarians and the nationalist conservatives who love big government, we shouldn't let them run away with the narrative that this is a problem of too much freedom, because it certainly isn't. It's Chinese communism and the failure of American bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely. And you don't offend me by asking the question if there's any conservatives left or libertarians left, because I agree with you. I'm not sure.
What does
I'm not
conservatism
sure.
mean anymore?
I'm not sure what it means. I'm just more interested in Americanism and freedom
Amen.
and liberty and less government versus big government. And I definitely appreciate you bringing that out, Austin, that the problem is not enough government. That's not the problem. The problem is there's too much government, and this fiasco with the FDA and the WHO just highlights that. And that's where I agree with you. I'm glad you answered the question about do we still have a republic, because those actions of federalism and that friction is supposed to be in our system. When the president said that he had the power to do something that he really didn't have, and he didn't have to admit it publicly, but he did admit it by his policy changes.
Well, if there's something if he can say something publicly, he will. You know?
Yeah, yeah, but he's never going to admit if he was wrong. But he
Yeah.
does do policy changes that shows that omission is what I've seen in the past. If he gets enough heat for it, and he definitely got some feedback from the governors, and I'm glad that he got it. I
Me
really am,
too.
because it gave me confidence that we're still here, and it also gives me confidence that, you know what, you don't have to be in an elected office to make a difference, and we need to get on our legislators about the FDA and get on our state legislators about those emergency powers, where the mayors and other executives at the county level were making decisions and being very almost tyrannical, quite honestly, in some situations.
The state of Missouri, the Department of Conservation made it free to go fishing. You didn't need a license to go fishing. And Greene County in Missouri made it illegal to buy fishing equipment. So,
That's
so,
like the governor of Michigan making it illegal to buy vegetable seeds so you can grow a garden. That was
yeah,
an unbelievable. Those are the kind of things that we need. I guess we're going to have to address it by legislation and say, no, we didn't really intend for you to be able to do that.
see, now
But
my solution was my girlfriend, who was living in Michigan at the time, her solution was escape, was to move
yeah,
in this great
yeah.
republic from Michigan to the state of Missouri so that we can go fishing.
Everybody's got a good solution, and we have the freedom in this country to do it. I had dinner at a restaurant, inside the restaurant just last night, not far from Louisiana, but it was just across a certain state line.
Did you
So
wear a
we had
mask while you were eating?
no mask while I was eating, no mask at all. Nobody had a mask on. It was very comfortable. There was no obvious crazy social distancing rules for the customers, but they were there. If you knew what you were looking for, they were there, and it was all very well done. Great place to eat, called Bacchus by the Beach over in Pass Christian, Mississippi.
Can I say one thing,
Yes,
Colonel, about
sir.
the
Go ahead.
mask thing? I think that it has
Yeah,
become kind of a position on the right now to be very resistant of masks. And okay, I get it. I don't think that masks should be mandatory, right? It should be a choice. I know a lot of conservatives are mad at Costco for making it mandatory. That's fine. You don't have to shop at Costco. But here's my
yeah,
problem. People say, I don't like this phrase new normal. You know, when the scientists trot out this concept of the new normal, or when the mayor of Los Angeles says the new normal. I don't like that either. However, can the new normal be that we cover our mouths when we cough and cover our mouths when we sneeze? Because it's one thing to say I'm not going to wear a mask, but I'm out at the warehouse, I'm out there at the hardware store over the weekend, and you got some guy goes blah, 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 coughing as loud as he can and not covering his mouth. So can I just ask this? Can the new normal be cover your mouth when you cough or you sneeze, or else I might do righteous violence upon you and feel justified in doing so?
just as our parents, I'm sure, mine did. Everybody's parents teaches them to be polite and have good manners, and part of that is
Yes.
covering your mouth when you cough. And I'm not a zealot on the mask one way or the other than if a store is going over some mandated policy, and they want to do more than that, I have a right to not shop there. It's called the free market. It's an individual right, and that's what
No,
I
I'm
tell
sorry, you
people.
don't. You don't, Colonel.
Yeah.
You are. No, it is mandatory for you to buy health insurance, so you must go to the marketplace and buy it.
Well, that's a different story. Maybe we can change that sometime. But the mask thing is, look, they have their uses, and we should all use good common sense. And I like that. Cover your mouth when you cough and you sneeze.
Yes,
Well,
don't be
Austin,
a
thank you.
slime.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a great discussion, and helping educate folks on what's going on with the Liberty movement, and what we need to do moving forward and think about as we get out of this pandemic. Have a great day.
Thanks, Colonel. Have a good one.
We're very grateful for Mr. Peterson joining us today to discuss where the Liberty movement is in this country and what it means for the country moving into the future. I'll talk to you next week on the Rob Manning.